The Tuesday, March 17th special board meeting will now come to order. We're convened as of, 4:02 p.m. I would like to ask everyone attending the meeting to respectfully mute their phones, mute yourself until you're recognized to speak. Thank you all for joining us this evening. The meeting recordings, along with the unofficial minutes of the meetings, will be posted as soon as practicable on the board's website. During tonight's meeting, we are also providing communication access real-time translation, also known as CART. Anyone who would like it to access this service should send an email to the RTD board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com, and a link will be provided. Additionally, the CART transcript can be automatically translated for anyone who would like access to a live transcript of this meeting in Spanish. A live stream of this meeting is also available via the RTD YouTube page. I would now like to call the roll for the board. Director Arcuri, not here. Director Banker. Director Bouquet. Boy, we're rolling. Yeah, apparently. Director Busick is not here, I don't think. Director Chandler. Oh my gosh.
Present.
All right, we're
the
rolling.
The C's are here.
We are on a roll. Director right. Geisinger. Oh my gosh. Director Gutschenritter. Let's see.
He's there.
Director Gutschenritter, you're here, right? Not just your phone. I'm going to take that as a yes. He came off. Director Guzman.
I'm here.
Director Harwick.
Yep.
Director Larson.
Here.
Director Nicholson.
On your left.
Director O'Keefe is here. Director Pagliari.
Present.
All right, look at that. Director Ruscia will be joining by virtually, I believe, and Director Whitmore.
Present.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 directors present and 5 not yet accounted for. We do have a quorum. Please note that the special board meeting does not have a section for public comment. However, anyone who would like to address the board can still offer their comments by email or by participating in person or remotely during a regularly scheduled March board meeting, which is set for next Tuesday, March 24th. Also, please note that the board has a study session after this meeting to discuss capital assets and facilities and facilities and fleet transition plan. That meeting is anticipated to begin at 5:30 p.m. There is one item up for discussion, and that is for GM CEO Johnson. Would you please introduce the item on budget and service considerations?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon to all assembled. Deborah Johnson, General Manager and CEO. If we could bring up the presentation, please. And if we could, oh, I don't have the next slide.
While you're preparing, I will note that Director Banker has joined us.
All right.
And Director Arcuri.
So this afternoon, what the team and I have in store for you is to discuss several critical items as it relates to the work that we have undertaken thus far relative to 2027's budget and service considerations, keeping in mind that this discussion is just that, a discussion, seeking guidance and direction from the board as it relates to where we sit as an agency and in light of a structural deficit of which we have talked about in this exact room. What we intend to do this afternoon, Kelly Mackey, our Chief Financial Officer, will review the structural deficit and provide an overview. I will take the next sections which deal with the value that RTD brings to the greater region as well as its economic impact, then discuss the organizational realignment. I call that out specifically as there's been a lot of media reports around that and conversations that have ensued with this body, recognizing that the organizational realignment is something that's taking place that is separate per se from the 2027 budget discussion, but of course there is a nexus, and then round out with budget considerations. So with that, I will yield the floor to Ms. Mackey. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kelly Mackey, Chief Financial Officer. I first want to briefly level set on what a structural deficit is. In simple terms, ongoing costs have been rising faster than ongoing revenue, particularly as the federal pandemic era relief funding has expired. This is not unique to RTD. Transit agencies across the country are facing similar pressures, and the situation is something that I'm going to jump ahead. In 2026, the budget shows that we expect to use about $250 million more than we take in when you include the cash we need for capital projects without carry forwards. And this chart shows change in net position. In simple words, think about that as a profit or a loss for the year. Whether we ended the year ahead or behind, once all revenue and expenses are accounted for. Going back to 2019, RTD was already in a difficult deficit position with a $127 million loss. It was only due to the federal pandemic relief that the agency has had a surplus in recent years. In 2024, RTD had a $282 million loss. In preliminary unaudited financials, we are seeing a $227 million loss for 2025. And of course, the 2026 budget, which incorporated scaling back on a lot of expenses, is at a $260 million loss. These are very serious deficits. And at this level, this is not a performance issue, it is a viability issue. And the current model is clearly not sustainable. And I want to explain two different ways that government agencies measure financial health. First, there's what's called the change in net position. You can think of this almost like profit or loss for the year. It includes non-cash items like depreciation, which is the way we account for the aging of our assets over time. Second, there's what's called sources and uses of funds. That one is more like checking your household bank account. It looks only at cash coming in and cash going out. And it tells us whether current revenues are enough to cover our day-to-day operations and our required capital spending. A structural deficit happens when our normal ongoing expenses are higher than our normal ongoing revenues, not because of a recession or a one-time project, but because our basic cost structure is out of alignment. And that's the situation we are facing today. Importantly, this number changes as conditions change, so it's not fixed, and it's something that we actively monitor. One other important point is that rating agencies are expecting us to reduce expenses for 2027 so that we return to fiscal balance. Last week, S&P Global Ratings described our weaker financial results as transitory, meaning temporary, and said they believe we can get back in line with our rating if we bring 2027 expenses down to align with revenue in order to avoid a downgrade next year. Now here's a view of how revenue and expense have changed over the past several years. Costs have continued to rise while ongoing revenues are not keeping pace. Expenses in areas like labor, materials, safety, security, and maintaining the system have grown steadily. And at the same time, revenues like sales and use taxes, fares, and grants fluctuate from year to year, but they do not grow substantially over time. So the simple message here is that expenses are going up faster than revenue, which is why we're facing a structural deficit and why we need a long-term plan to bring these two lines back into alignment. This chart is a reminder of how Colorado compares to other states when it comes to state funding support for transit. And based on the National Transit Database information, Colorado contributes a relatively small share of statewide transit funding between West Virginia and Missouri. For RTD, this means we rely much more heavily on local sales and use taxes, fares, and federal funds than many of our peer regions. And as we face rising costs and the end of federal pandemic relief, the limited level of state funding becomes even more important to understand. The structural deficit is not just about operations, it's also influenced by the broader funding landscape that RTD operates in. The overall approach we're using to address the structural deficit is thoughtful and strategic. So the goal is not just to reduce costs, It's to make sure that financial decisions support RTD's long-term mission and strategic plan. And these are the strategic priorities from the board-adopted strategic plan for 2021 through 2026. We organize the approach around 4 pillars of community value, customer excellence, employee ownership, and financial success. We want to preserve access for the community, especially where transit is most needed. We aim to prioritize core services and strengthen customer support functions. And we are also making sure we use people power wisely and listen to employee ideas. And finally, we are reviewing expenses and exploring revenue opportunities so we can continue to operate sustainably. This is the framework guiding the presentation content you will see in the next set of slides. And next, I will turn to Deborah.
So thank you very kindly, Ms. Mackey. As I indicated, we are looking at value and economic impact as it relates to the Regional Transportation District and how we are interwoven in said fabrics of the communities that we serve. Ms. Mackey teed us up very nicely, focusing on the strategic priorities, which, as she indicated, are the functional pillars upon which decisions are made, especially when we look at it through a budgetary lens. So what's critically important here, recognizing we talked about the strategic priorities and considering the strategic plan in and of itself, there are certain elements of the strategic plan that the board adopted back in August of 2021. And encompassed in that strategic plan, we have values, strategic priorities, and our mission. And with that as a backdrop, wanted to showcase that out of 300 million individuals within RTD service area, over 70% are within a 5-minute walk or roll from a bus stop or a rail station, and 1 out of every 2 of the metro area's residents live within 5 minutes of a stop or station. Next slide, please. And so as we talk about the value of RTD in the Denver metro region, you can clearly see on this slide before you that while only 3 to 4% of RTD's customers use transit 3 or more times per week, 2 out of 5 metro area residents boards an RTD vehicle at least once a month. Next slide, please. And so this is an important slide as we showcase the Net Promoter Score. And as you are aware that RTD conducts surveys on an annual basis, not only do we conduct community surveys, we conduct customer surveys as well as employee surveys. Now, the results from the community value surveys over the past 3 years demonstrates that improvements in RTD's community net promoter score in recent years has been nothing short of remarkable. 58-point increase. And just for everyone's edification, you can see the angry little red people up top, whereby it talks about what net promoter scores are. They're actually the percentage of promoters subtracted from the percentage of detractors, which equals the net performance score. And with that as a backdrop, the net promoter score asks how likely a person will use a service or patronize a business. And so as it relates to where RTD currently sits, the agency is 70 points higher than the national average, which is depicted on the slide before you, which is in gray to the far right, where you see -61. And so RTD Survey Consultancy, which is ETC Institute, and you guys have heard us reference them before as they've done our surveys for the past couple of years, where they have conducted more than 5 million, basically they've had more than 5 million respondents to their surveys in over 1,000 cities and counties dating back to 2010. So when we talk about national averages, this is inclusive of transit agencies, city, counties, because it could take place if you had a municipality that asked about transportation services. So wanted to ensure that I'm level setting in reference to what that pool consists of. But it's important to emphasize that respondents were asked whether they utilize transit, and as it relates to that average, it's the respondents who identify as transit users. Moving forward to the next slide, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but just wanted to give a snapshot relative to the impact that RTD has on communities as a whole. This information was extrapolated from our 2025 Community Values Survey and is statistically valid, and you can note that on the bottom of the slide. But continuing on the theme of RTD's value to the region, the next few slides are going to highlight areas of significant improvement for the agency and how RTD stacks up against transit providers on a macro scale. So community surveys within the RTD region were mailed to a random sample of households in the area. Responses are monitored to ensure that they are representative of the sample. The agency in 2025 received 770 completed surveys, which yields a survey margin of error of plus or minus 3.8% at a 95% confidence level. So in 2025, 73% of respondents indicated that RTD's transit services provided value to them personally, compared to 31% of respondents nationwide. Next slide, please. Here we see that more than 3/4 of respondents agree or strongly agree that RTD provides them accesses to places of employment, a 4% year-over-year increase and a 9% increase from 2023. Moving forward to the next slide, please. So here we can see that RTD compares favorably against other transit agencies nationally in terms of attracting and retaining employment opportunities, providing educational opportunities and access to places of leisure, and achieving sustainable practices. That's why we have that boxed off. While you can see that the change in percentage is negligible considering the statistic validity of the survey, you can clearly see that we are trending above the national average. Moving forward to the next slide. And this will be the last one that I showcase. What we see before us here is that respondents find RTD to provide safe transportation alternatives, and I'd like to point out that this perception nicely aligns with the agency's adopted Vision Zero goals. Next slide, please. So now I want to turn our attention really quickly to the organizational design and workplace assessment. We often refer to it as the ODWA, which I commissioned back in 2023. Next slide, please. So in alignment with our strategic plan priority of employee ownership, in 2022, with the employee survey that was leveraged, there was feedback that was garnered that I wanted to delve more deeply in. And what I mean by that is when we do a survey, it doesn't matter who said what. It's basically if there are constant themes, we want to ensure that we can delve into those so we can optimize the work environment for the betterment of the people that comprise the agency. And upon reading all the open-ended comments, I felt it was incumbent upon me as the leader to delve a little more deeply and understand basically the agency's culture and the climate and review the organizational structure and staffing. And so doing so, enlisted the help of a third-party consultant to conduct just what I outlined, the agency structure, cultural, and climate. Recognizing that this was commissioned in October of 2023, by the time we started with informational interviews, focus groups, and things of the like to garner more information relative to the opinions, perceptions, and attitudes that were gleaned from the employee survey of 2022 that took place. It was in January through April of 2024. The final report was released in June and mailed to all employees' homes. I basically held an all-hands meeting. I remember this as if it were yesterday up in Boulder that was live streamed as I took our colleagues through the responses and the recommendations that were put forward by the consultant upon doing their assessment of the organization. If we move forward to the next slide. This basically showcases, and just for everyone's edification, I failed to say in the upper right-hand corner, we've done some call-outs on the page of the report that was provided to the agency on June 24th of 2024, and contained therein were the 5 thematic challenges. And they were organization and staffing, employee experience, coordination and collaboration, communication, and the agency's future direction. Moving forward to the next slide, please. So the 5 recommendations in particular that are central to this presentation is the consultancy's finding regarding organization and staffing. The recommendation was, and I quote, redesign RTD's organizational structure and operating approach to better align roles and responsibilities and encourage collaboration. The reason I'm calling this out in particular is that there was an article that was featured in the Denver Post that conflated the realignment efforts that go hand in hand with the organizational design and workplace assessment that I've just referenced that was released in June of 2024 with the operating expense and reduction efforts that are still under consideration. and the two efforts are separate and distinct. The Ottawa realignment would have occurred irrespective of the 2027 budget consideration. So I just wanted to point that out as we move forward. Going on to the next slide, please. So recognizing the elements that are contained within the organizational assessment, keenly on page 56, the consultant outlined a three-phase implementation period for the recommendations with near-term, mid-term, and longer-term solutions. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but just wanted to highlight a few selected tactics. So if you look at number 2, for instance, it's the redesign of the leadership team and fill new roles. Hence, that was critically important to get the right leaders in the right place before we tackled organizational alignment and structures. Another item I'll just call out is item 5 that's listed here. Establish expectations for encouraging more collaboration, coordination, and communication among hybrid work teams. And that was garnered through employee survey feedback and basically is nestled in the one RTD approach as we move forward. If we move forward to the next slide. So phase 2, July 25, 2026. Let's look at the first one here that was extrapolated from page 56 of the Organizational Workplace Design and Assessment. Examine key roles and responsibilities of all work groups and consider whether new structures are needed. In particular, there were some that were called out quite naturally. Operations. Operations had not had a redesign since 1994 when light rail first came into this agency as a modality. Additional departments, communications and engagement, work groups within the deputy CEO's purview is something in particular. So wanted to spend some time on this because this dates back to last summer, but has received coverage as we move forward, and just wanted to ensure that everybody knows that this was not something that just appeared. This has been ongoing for the past couple of years. And then I'll also call out, which has been very helpful to the organization and currently in progress. Item 3, form small work teams to explore issues related to appreciation, security, and well-being. And this is something that has been in progress and ongoing, and we have seen that through previous survey responses as we've heard from individuals that work at the agency that have found the work environment more welcoming in the sense that they don't feel as if they'd be a victim of crime here within the greater working areas encompassed within the Regional Transportation District. And then looking at phase 3, if we could move forward to the next slide. These are some elements that'll be underway July 2026, 2027. I do want to note that with item 3, that we honed in on this, which was redesign the performance management approach. That's for non-represented employees. Some adjustments were made relative to leveraging strategic priorities or strategic initiatives for short-term goals and decreasing those to 2, for instance, and then basically having our performance review on a cycle that would not be impacted by things that happen year end. Something else that's critically important I'd like to point out as we look forward to what lies ahead is tactic number 5, establish a comprehensive plan to build more effective leadership at all levels. This is ongoing. We commit 2 years ago with supervisor and management training, and now we're looking at micro credentials. And what I mean by that, for instance, if you're working within a work unit and you have a project and you're looking to enhance your project management skills, you may not have an opportunity to go to PMI, being the Project Management Institute, and becoming a certified project manager. We will have programs here within RTD that basically gives you the basic elements to enhance the project management ability so we don't run into scope creep. We're delivering on time within budget, and that would be a micro-credentialing program that basically then could position somebody to go on and utilize their professional development funds to then go in to PMI and become a certified project manager, for instance. That's just an example. And so if we move on to the next slide, please. Just to sum up the realignments and reductions, this slide delineates the department realignments currently underway from the budget and service reductions needed to address the structural budget deficit, which will be covered later on in this presentation. So quite naturally, when you look at the blue bar slide or bar title, you know, we're looking to improve efficiency and reduce silos and strengthen accountability and enhance collaboration and internal communications. Quite naturally, when you look at the orange bar, you can clearly see that board approval is required with that, because those are critical elements relative to governance and policy and ensuring that we are all being good fiscal stewards as we move forward. So when we talk about addressing the structural budget deficit, aligning services with available resources, focusing resources on highest need initiatives, service, safety, regulatory compliance, and as you heard from Ms. Mackey with the introduction to this presentation, it's about long-term fiscal sustainability. And so really briefly, if we go to the next slide, this is a depiction of the operations department realignment, and I want to say these aren't positioned, this is functional realignment relative to ensuring that we're optimizing different work groups within the department's position and resources. This supports RTD's strategic priorities of customer excellence, employee ownership, financial success, and then more importantly, as we talk about the whole aspect of strengthening the strategic direction and streamlining decision-making. So this was just a snapshot to showcase what we're actually talking about. And then when you look far to the left, I know it's difficult to read, but this was more or less to ground everybody. We're looking at the centralized function. So instead of having contracted services just for bus in one area, then you have contracted services for commuter rail, you have a work group that is contracted services, operations for bus, commuter rail, and flex ride and microtransit. So it's more comprehensive, and we can basically have an individual that has laser-like focus on that, where we have more consistency by virtue of how we're managing our overarching operation, considering that service delivery is the key component, the core business function to this organization as a whole. Moving forward to the next slide, please. And this is another example within the Deputy CEO's office. Within Mr. Pena's auspices, there's different areas. There's regulatory compliance by virtue of safety and environmental compliance, and we have civil rights and things of the like. But within this realignment is the principal functions that cover planning and capital programs, because both of those entities have been structured to support fast tracks. That was something too that hadn't been realized, and focusing on the one RTD approach, it puts it in perspective. So with that, I will yield the floor back to Ms. Mackey to talk about the budget development process. Thank you.
Thank you, GM CEO Johnson. So this part of the presentation discusses how we are building the budget for the next year and how it aligns with the broader strategy you've seen so far. The details in the upcoming slides will show the timeline and the key decision points as we work toward a balanced, sustainable 2027 budget. This word cloud summarizes the many factors that brought us to where we are today financially. There's no single cause. It's really the combination of many pressures over several years. We've seen rising costs due to inflation, technology needs, safety and regulatory requirements, and system expansions. We've also dealt with people power shortages, supply chain challenges, and higher insurance and security costs. At the same time, the pandemic dramatically changed ridership and required major investments in safety and service continuity. We also relied on significant one-time federal relief programs like CARES, CRISA, and ARPA, which allowed us to maintain service. Now that those funds are gone, the underlying mismatch between our ongoing revenues and expenses is much more visible. So this slide really helps explain that the structural deficit didn't come from one decision or 1 year. It's the result of many forces accumulating over time. Here are key steps in developing the 2027 budget. The main point of this slide is that the process is already underway and follows a structured timeline from spring through the end of the year. We start by prioritizing the asset management plan and bringing early updates to the Finance and Planning Committee. Throughout the summer and fall, staff and the board will work through expenditure alignment, the 5-year financial forecast, and deficit elimination options. By October 15, the agency will publish the proposed 2027 budget for public inspection, followed by committee discussion and action. And once we enter January 2027, the approved budget goes into effect. This timeline shows the sequence of discussions and decisions that will guide us toward a balanced and sustainable 2027 budget. This summarizes the strategy we're discussing to close the structural deficit in 2027 and put RTD on a stable financial path. There are 4 main pieces to this approach. First, we're focusing on sustaining our core service, and that means right-sizing service levels based on how people are actually using transit today. Second, we're addressing the deficit directly by improving efficiencies, reviewing contracts, limiting one-time fixes, and avoiding new borrowing. Third, we're looking for ways to responsibly grow revenue through partnerships and other opportunities. And finally, we're committed to transparent communication so that both the board and the public understand the impacts and the steps we're taking. The bottom line is that 2026 is the planning year and timed to execute for 2027 to be fiscally balanced, and the agency will continue monitoring and adjusting as needed. Here are preliminary unaudited results for 2025 for your reference. In simple terms, our change in net position, which you can think of as our loss for the year, was a loss of about $227 million. That's actually an improvement of about 20% from the prior year, and it was also significantly better than what we had budgeted. Revenue grew year over year, and expenses came in lower than budget, which helped improve our overall results. But even with that improvement, the agency is still operating at a very significant deficit. And the only reason this deficit didn't show up several years earlier, again, is because we received the extraordinary federal relief funding, CARES Act funding, CRISA, and ARPA, during the global pandemic. Absent those emergency funds, this deficit would have surfaced much sooner. So while 2025 shows improvement, the long-term challenge remains that ongoing revenues and expenses are still out of alignment. This view here on this slide helps us understand what our financial position looks like once we remove 2 items that can make the numbers appear larger than they really are: the East Colfax BRT pass-through and prior year carry-forwards. When we strip those out, the 2025 results show a decrease in net position or loss of about $217 million. This matters because these adjusted numbers give us the clearest picture of our true ongoing deficit. And it's from this view that we are setting a 2027 target, that we need to close a loss gap of about $215 million to bring the budget back into balance. In terms of cash or use of funds with capital expenditures, that amount is about $250 million for 2026. This 5-year financial forecast has a message here that is pretty straightforward. So to balance the budget for 2027, we do need to reduce the deficit by about that $215 million. And that target comes directly from our projections and the 2025 results. You'll notice that total revenues are expected to grow over the next several years, while expenses also grow, but at varying rates depending on operating needs, debt service, and capital projects. When we look specifically at 2027, one of the most important numbers in this chart is operating expenses, and this excludes East Colfax BRT for 2027. It needs to come in around $790 million to achieve balance. The forecast also shows the impact on reserves. Even with improvements starting in 2027, reserves are under pressure, and we must protect them to maintain financial stability and comply with fiscal policy requirements. This slide shows a range of options we have for reducing the structural deficit. These are not decisions today. This is the landscape of what is available to us. The items on the left reflect expenditure reductions, such as reducing non-revenue vehicles, slowing or freezing hiring, limiting professional development, and looking at workforce-related options. Some of these are actions that staff can take, and others would require board direction. The table on the right highlights potential contractual reductions. These include areas like third-party security, IT services, software licensing, and professional service consultants. Again, these represent tools in the toolbox. They are not recommendations just yet. The key message is that closing a deficit of this very large size requires looking across the entire organization, staffing, contracts, operations, and support functions. And you'll see in the next slides how these fit into the bigger strategy. This summarizes different revenue ideas that can be explored as part of closing the structural deficit. None of these are decisions yet. They're simply potential avenues that could help strengthen the long-term financial position. Some options are operational, like parking fees, expanding advertising, or monetizing retail or data. and others would require policy or legislative changes, such as retaining citation revenue or allowing higher risk and potentially higher return investments. We can also look at opportunities to bring in more external funding through partnerships on shared capital projects, real estate development around stations, and grant maximization. And the important point is that solving a deficit of this size means looking at not just reducing costs, but also thoughtfully ways to increase revenue. And these options give us a starting point for those conversations. And this concludes my presentation for this segment. I'll turn it back over to GM CEO Johnson.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mackey. I failed to say that you all will receive this presentation. As some board members know, we were working on this up until like an hour or so ago. And so I want to ensure that everybody is aware that this will be transmitted to you along with the other presentation. At this juncture, I'll yield the floor to you, Mr. Chair, because the remainder of the discussion will be an executive session.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Ms. Mackey, let's see, let me find my place here. We are now going to entertain a motion to move into executive session. Executive session pursuant to Section 24-6-402, Paran 4, Paran E, CRS is for discussion of potential workforce reduction scenarios and options, and pursuant to Section 24-6-402 for Paran 4, Paran B, to receive legal advice regarding compliance with federal and state laws and collective bargaining agreements related to the same. In a moment, the board will meet in executive session to discuss taking the potential workforce reduction scenarios and options. I'd like to append the motion to move into executive session. Beg your pardon? No. Into executive session to state that the special board meeting will be deemed adjourned after it adjourns into executive session. For public transparency, this means that once the board moves into executive session, the main meeting will be adjourned. I will now entertain a motion to move into executive session to discuss the following items pursuant to Section 24-6-402, Paran 4, Paran E, CRS for discussion of potential workforce reduction scenarios and options, and pursuant to 24-6-402 for B, CRS to receive legal advice regarding compliance with federal and state laws and collective bargaining agreements.
So moved.
Motion by Guzman. A second. Second, Geisler.
Mr. Chair, I'd like
Do
to.
I need to vote, right? Okay.
I'd like to comment before you do.
Okay.
I have comment on the motion. I don't think we should move into executive session just yet. We just heard something really significant. The public arguably just heard it as well. And I think it's perfectly reasonable for us to ask questions of the GM and CEO about that presentation in public session before we go and discuss it behind closed doors. And I certainly have a fair number of questions about how we got here that I would feel uncomfortable not having addressed in public session.
Okay, we have a motion to move, and so you should vote no, and we need 10 votes of the board to move into executive session. I can find any kind of roster here, so don't forget about it. So, any other discussion on the motion? Hearing none, we are going to take a vote. Director Curie, this is a vote to move into executive session. Okay. Director Banker.
No.
Okay. Director Bouquet, not here. Director Busick, not here. Director Chandler.
No.
Okay. Director Geisinger. Director Guttenritter.
Yes.
Director Guzman.
Yes.
Director Harwick.
Yes.
Director Larson.
No.
Director Nicholson.
No.
Director Pagliari.
Yes.
Director Ruscia, have you joined? Okay. Director Whitmore.
Yes.
And I am a yes. We do not have the requisite number of votes to move into executive session. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 yes votes and what I get, 5, 7 no votes, right? No. Yes, that's correct. So that is, we are not moving into executive session. So I would like to adjourn for 5 minutes so we can gather a plan to move forward with the special board meeting. We will reconvene in 5 minutes. Yeah. Yeah, okay. Okay, we'll have to pick that up. Yeah,
There's nothing wrong. You can just make another motion when the time comes.
yeah.
If you want to get super advanced, we can do a motion to reconsider, but I think that the intent that I understood was that people just wanted to ask some questions and they would like to enter into executive session later.
Okay, yeah,
But, so, I think that's your plan.
okay. Perfecto. All right.
Right, that is what I meant, yes. We still need to have the conversation. But I think we need,
Well,
I think there are some parts of this that
a moment.
Looks like your mic is on.
Jack, we're going to go ahead and try to get back into meeting. Thanks. Okay, thank you for the brief recess. We are going to allow directors to ask some public questions first and then see if we can re-entertain a motion to move into executive session. Do I have anyone that wishes to be recognized? Director Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for indulging me. GM CEO Johnson, or maybe this is a question for Ms. Mackey, but I think she's been here a little less in time. GM CEO Johnson. Our budget surplus has been declining since 2022, as the slides showed, and we've had a 9-figure budget deficit for 3 years now. Why are we just having this conversation now? Why wasn't there a correction 3 years ago when we started running a huge deficit?
Yes, thank you very kindly. Thank you for the question. If anything, these issues have come full circle to the board, and as we indicated at the onset of the presentation, this is something that's done in collaboration. And so basically, from a staff perspective, we can put forward various recommendations and things of the like. I would say that it's a collaborative effort, recognizing the governing body, and I'm not trying to point fingers, but I'm just stating clearly, as you heard from Ms. Mackey, recognizing that we were intentional and purposeful with the monies that we received. I can tell you on January 10th of 2021, layoff notices had been issued. On January 11th, 2021, we received information that we were getting CRISA money. Hence, we were able to leverage that and do a callback for those employees that had received notification of a reduction in force. And so we invested those monies as we drew them down and invested those monies going full circle. You can look at the Office of the State Auditor reports as it related to that, and decisions were made relative to where we stand today. So that's what I can offer up as a response.
Thank you. What efforts have been taken over the last, like recognizing that this structural deficit has been evident for more than a few years now, and as CFO Mackey pointed out, was evident during that period where we were drawing on the CRISI grants, that once they ran out, we would have a significant deficit. What efforts were taken to increase revenue? We're now talking about revenue increases. Just walk me through, as someone who's only been here for a year, what efforts were taken to increase revenue and correct for that structural deficit over the last 5 years?
GMCO Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Secretary Nicholson. For the record, I'd like to correct what was asked of me. We are not using CRISI grants. I said CRISA, ARPA, and CARES Act funding. Keeping in mind that there had been discussions that ensued, I can tell you, being in a forum such as this, I had suggested various aspects like property tax, as other states do, to fund transit. You can clearly see from the NTD data that the percentage in reference to contributions at the state level is at 1%. By virtue of the way this organization was set up, I could Monday morning quarterback, but sales and use tax, as you heard from our certified public accountant that serves as the chief financial officer as well, that those sources aren't stable. There's fluctuation because there's discretionary usage in reference to having that as a means of a revenue stream. So going forward, when you talk about structural deficit, there's been different elements. I can't speak to all of that, in some being SUM, as I came into the agency and we were leveraging that monies, and there was intentionality with the board as there was a revenue diversification revenue diversification working group that was convened, and at the time the direction was, let's look at the Tabor aspect. And that's what this body decided to do at that juncture.
Sure.
Thank you. Why didn't the agency put together a plan in that time to close the structural deficit? Or did the agency put together a plan that I'm not aware of?
Mr. Chair, thank you. Once again, recognizing that there was a revenue diversification work group that actually was headed up by the then Finance and Planning Committee Chair. There were various options that were discussed, and for some board members that were here, feel free to augment what I am stating, or we could look at the record. But there was not the desire at that time, as I indicated in my previous response. The direction was focused on Tabor limitations. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Binker.
Yes, thank you. You know, I have wondered over the past couple of years, and this is just basically a question that I've wondered about, and that is the board over the past couple of years did lower fares. They passed access on demand with no fares. They initiated the LIVE program, and then, of course, our ridership decreased substantially, and that decreased our fare revenue. I've always been wondering, and I know this is not a question for our CFO because she was not here, but do you recall, did the budget office, did they ever bring forth fiscal notes as to the cost of those programs and how it would impact the budget? I just wanted to know if that happened.
TMCO Johnson.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Director Banker, for the question. I can't speak to the LIVE program because that occurred, it preceded me. So did Access on Demand. That was instituted right before I joined the organization. As it related to the Fair Study and Equity analysis, that was done in relationship to lowering fares. There was a lot of analysis that was done. That was an 18-month program, and recognizing what was before us in the midst of the pandemic and looking at loosely best practices in reference to trying to garner additional transit utilization. There were a lot of transit agencies across the country that were lowering fares as well, recognizing that people weren't leveraging transit for traditional means, i.e. commuting to work. That was something that was explored. It was more or less looking through the lens of basic economic supply and demand, in the sense that, you know, we're enticing certain demographics to want to ride and they would bring other people along. So that was the rationale, and there was cost analysis that was done relative to the lowering of the fares.
Before we move on, I wanted to note that Director Rusha has advised me she is on the phone. Director Geisinger?
I just wanted, having been here a while, to just point out that at the time that those things were passed, we really were trying to bring back ridership and, you know, expecting, for instance, Access on Demand there was a pilot, and then the hope was that program was created to lower our costs because it was so much more expensive to access a ride that this was an option. What happened was both of them became more popular, and many more people came into both, which is why we had to pass a fare recently. Same thing with the lowering the fares. It was an effort to bring people back, and you know, all of them were, you know, with a plan in mind, but not necessarily all achieved.
Thank you. That's very helpful. It helps me understand.
Okay, I've got Director Guzman first, then Director Arcuri.
So previously was asked how long we've known about this. Our budget is a public document. It can go back as far as you would like to look at it. The information is plain as day if you look at any of those documents in terms of the structural deficit of the agency. Just quickly pulling it up, 22, 23, 24, and 25 all demonstrated the same knowledge and information that was brought forth in the Plan 2026, which this board and current members passed for this year. So there's no secrets. Surprise, you can go and find it. You just have to go and read the documents and do your homework. It's unfortunate. All public transit agencies run at a deficit. We know this. This is not uncommon. We are unfairly compared to states that support smaller geographies and smaller regions with a much more controlled and constrained system that does not often look like ours. They don't deal with the same weather patterns. They don't deal with the same construction problems, surface road reconstructions, bridges, etc. And they are funded by multiple states or by their state to begin with. 44th in the nation, Colorado, 44th for state transit funding. This is not to make light of any of the questions that were asked, but very sincerely, this is not news. This has been present in every document that's come forward in my 4 years on the board, and it was here before I arrived. So doing the simple math, it's always been there. It's gotten worse, but we follow our fiscal policy. As it was stated, the CARISA funds, the ARPA funds, the additional one-time federal funding that was given through federal action for the time of the pandemic was used within our fiscal our fiscal policy for one-time projects and put to very good use to shore things up in a time where there was a lot of uncertainty about what was going on with federal funding. That money's gone. And we're still back at square one, which would have happened one way or the other. With respect to the FAIR process and the question about fiscal notes on anything that has come before this body, and all of the things that have come through the Finance and Planning Committee, the Operations Safety and Security Committee, or the Ops Committee before, everything had a fiscal note on it. Also public documents. They were discussed. They were discussed in the open, nothing was hidden, and it was brought before the board to make decisions. That includes the fare reduction and simplification that we went through in 2023 and implemented in 2024, because it was highly complicated before we made that change. And when it comes to any of the other services that we offer, I've never seen them come forward. In fact, if Director Busick were here, he'd be the first one to state he is a stickler about having the fiscal note on any policy that comes before this body. So without that, we would not have been able to make an effective decision. Now, in this year, in this board, current state, we have taken away funding from wrapping our buses and our trains and removed it from our budget at a time when we need to look at diversifying our revenues. We have increased costs for perceived or planned or desired special services. That's not a need. That is something that we can help and participate in doing. We have increased costs for how we pay for information that's given to the public through the administrative side of things. We have made policies and passed plans that have not been intertwined with the creation of the budget, and that's the mistake that we have made. There you go, I'm gonna say it. By allowing those things to go forward, reducing your revenues and increasing your costs, we have done our fair share of participation in this work, and no one sitting here is innocent of it.
Director Arcuri.
Thank you. Ms. Mackey, I have a question about your presentation where you were talking about the Standard & Poor's credit ratings. As I recall, a couple months ago, you said things were good, and you said something this afternoon that we might be downgraded if we don't turn things around. Could you expand upon that, especially knowing where my confusion is now?
Yes, thank you. So the Moody's report that came out recently, their detailed report is available for purchase. I would recommend reading that. But the Standard & Poor's Global Ratings report that came out, that I believe is available, so you can see the detailed information in addition to their article. And so yes, in that they acknowledge in a very detailed sense how fantastic the management of RTD is. They gave us really good thumbs up. But at the same time, they say we have been operating with a healthy reserve balance, but we do need to turn things around and reduce expenses significantly to balance the budget by 2027. Otherwise, they discussed today, they will probably downgrade us because we need to have our finances in line with what our rating is. Currently, we have a very strong credit rating, but because we have been operating at a deficit in recent years, we're not really operating how we're being scored. And so but they acknowledge that's okay currently because of the healthy reserves, which we have chosen essentially to spend down over the years, right? So from their perspective, perhaps our timing is right in that at this point in time, we are now reducing operating expenses. That might be the right thing to do. But they have given us a very clear warning, both Moody's and S&P, that we need to take action now for 2027.
Thank you.
Letting Director Geisinger ask a first round of questions.
Actually, I would like to move us to make a motion to go into executive session now. We have a particular purpose that this study session or this special meeting is for, and I voted to give a few minutes of public comment, but I'd like to move us on. I think you'd have to read the CRS again.
Yeah, it's a joy. Do I have a second?
Second.
Yes. All right, I've got Guzman second. Yeah.
Do you think maybe we could just see if anyone else who hasn't spoken wants to?
I've got a motion and a second, so there are two options. We can vote on the motion, or we can withdraw or the person who offered it can withdraw the motion and the second.
I'd like to vote on the motion.
Okay, we're going to vote on the motion. You guys are going to see if I can trip me up over this at some point. Let's see. I'm going to read the whole thing again because we're going to append the motion again. In a moment, the board will meet in executive session, or at least try to discuss workforce reduction scenarios and options. I would like to append the motion to move into executive session made by Director Geisinger to state that the special board meeting will be deemed adjourned after it adjourns into executive session for public transparency. This means that once the board moves into executive session, the main meeting will be adjourned. I will now entertain a motion. We have the motion to move into executive session pursuant to 24-6-402, paren 4, paren E, CRS for discussion of potential workforce reduction scenarios and options, and pursuant to section 24-6-402, paren 4, paren B, CRS to receive legal advice regarding compliance with federal and state laws and collective bargaining agreements related to the same. I will now take a vote. We need 10 votes. Dare to dream. Director Curie,
Yes.
Director Banker,
Yes.
Director Bouquet is not here. Director Busick, Director Chandler,
Yes.
Director Geisinger,
Yes.
Director Guchenritter,
Yes.
Director Guzman,
For a second time, yes.
Director Harwick,
Yep.
Director Larson.
Yes.
Note, Director Larson was excused to be gone, and Director Rusha was excused to be gone.
I'm here.
I know, virtually, not in the meeting. Director Nicholson,
Yes.
okay. Director Pagliari,
Yes.
Director Rusha,
Yes.
Director Whitmore,
Yes.
and I am a yes. So we are 13 yeses and 2 absent for a unanimous vote to move into executive session. Okay. The May meeting is adjourned into executive session as of 5:03 PM. For all of those expected to attend, would you please stay seated and, or at least not wander too far? And for everyone else who would like to vacate this room at this time and take all of your belongings with you, while we will transition as quickly as possible, please allow staff a few minutes to switch everything over from the public meeting to the executive session.